email, then you just have to check it out. Otherwise, if you'd love to have your name and email so we can add it to the list. My name is Mary Karch. I'm with Ramsey County Policy Unit in the County Managers Division, and glad to see you here today. The presentation today is going to be on using data to improve process and procedures with domestic abuse offenders. And presenters are from Ramsey County Corrections Department. I just want to make a couple of comments before they make their introductory comments. One of them is that this is based on kind of a long-standing process within the Corrections Department to try to incorporate evidence-based practices and research into what they do and everything they do. So it's not an isolated type of thing. They're working as a consistent process to deal with the challenge of doing something that sounds like it would be essential to general things like that. One other point was that I keep reminding of one of the comments that their corrections director made to the county board during the budget meeting. And she specifically was talking about domestic abuse offenders and said there is not a really good program that we have. There's variations, but nothing that she personally could say she was happy with. And so this is it's not just one of many kind of even priority topics. It's one that there's a very deep concern about. So that's my little point of view of the context for this. The folks actually doing the comments and presenting are going to be Leah Bauer, who's the supervisor of evaluation and performance research. Okay. And the Corrections Department, and Edward Hoffman, an analyst in the department. And they're going to start their work, and if we can all just do a brief intro, and then they can do the presentation. But I'm very happy.
Jose Diaz from Wilder Research. I'm Raul Martinez, Ramsey County. I'm Doug Petty with Ramsey County.
I'm Vita Petty with Ramsey County.
Sarah McGrath,
Jennifer O'Neill. Julie Atella with Wilder.
Peter Matheson with Wilder.
Jim Joel, the
Kate Carroll, Catholic Security.
Dan Lauer Schumacher with Catholic Charity.
Kathy Dial with the Senior Citizen Office at the Minnesota Department of Administration. Next row, County. Sure, this is Rich.
All right, well, we'll get started. Thanks for having us. I've actually never been to this group before, so kind of excited to be here. And thanks, Mary, for the introduction. So, as Mary said, we are going to be talking about how we've used information in community corrections to hopefully improve our domestic abuse, our results with our domestic abuse offenders. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about some trend data that we've seen. Ed's going to talk about some recidivism data, and then we're going to talk about how we've used that information to try to improve practices. So down on the bottom, I put some newspaper articles. Domestic violence can be pretty awful. And we've had some pretty awful cases all around the country and in Ramsey County. So the Shoreview, 2 shot, dead, 2 wounded in a apparent case of domestic violence. In 2013, the domestic violence toll, death toll was 37. And as Mary said, this has been kind of an issue for our department and something we're taking very seriously at looking at. And in addition, our judges are looking at this very closely. So in 2012, they met with our department, and they were concerned because they felt like domestic abuse offenders kept reappearing in their courtroom. So they want to know what works with this population, and particularly, is current domestic abuse programming effective? For those of you who don't know, if you are charged with and convicted of a domestic abuse crime, you have to, as part of your conditions of probation, complete a domestic abuse programming. It's statute. And I believe it's something like, how many hours? 30
minimum 24 hours of programming.
So that's so the programming is a critical piece of probation in Ramsey County with domestic abuse offenders. This is just to give you kind of an overview for the adult offenders supervised by Ramsey County in the past like 8 or 9 years. So as you can see, overall the trend's been down. We're supervising less folks, adults, 12,065 in 2013 compared to 14,787 in 2006. And this is a trend that's basically nationwide. However, not true with our domestic abuse population. This is, I think, our only population that's increasing, or has increased over the last 8 years. So in 2006, 800, 2013, 1,450, and that's over a 75% increase just in the domestic abuse offenders we are serving in Ramsey County. And if you have any questions along the way, maybe I couldn't have said that. Yeah.
Were there any significant changes?
I'm going to get into that. Okay. So I'm going to show you through a couple slides, and then I will talk about some policy changes that likely influence some of these numbers.
I mean, is this misdemeanor, felony?
Everything in domestic abuse. Not only have we seen a change in the numbers, we've seen a significant change in our racial composition of domestic abuse offenders that we supervise. So as you can see in, a little pointer, in 2006, so the red line is Black African American, the green is Caucasian, white. Down here you'll see Asian, Hispanic, Native American. Those populations have stayed relatively static. We have seen a slight increase in Asian. But as you can see, we've seen a complete change with African American and white. So in 2006, we supervised probably, let's see, about 43% of the population we supervised was white, and that went down to about 28% in 2013. On kind of a flip side, Black African American offenders was 39%, and now that's 53%. If you put that in numbers instead of percent, the white population actually has stayed number-wise stagnant, about, I think, around 350-ish. I'm rounding a bit. But the African American has, it's, I think, more than doubled, from about over 300 to over 700. So this is of concern to us. Why is this kind of happening?
One thing, if you do go back before 2006, so if we're looking in the late 90s, early 2000s, you're actually, we're picking it up here in 2006, but the rates would have been about 50% Caucasian and about 30 to 35% African American. So really, we've seen a complete flip-flop of percentages in the 13, over the last 13 to 15 years.
Can I ask a question about the race classification? They don't put necessarily match with the race thing on familiar living expenses. So if someone is Black and Native American, what would you
Yeah, good question. And unfortunately, this is something in our statewide system that we can't really change. I don't think there's an option, is there, for multi-racial? I can't remember. No, it's the probation system.
Okay,
Yeah.
there is a court.
Right, and this is from our probation system. It's kind of antiquated that way. And actually where we see, this is just a side, that's more of an issue with our juveniles than our adults, because the multiracial piece is really, yeah. So this is basically, I think you pick more or less one race category. I would hope so. I can't guarantee that, particularly back in 06.
There is a multiracial.
Is there now?
Yeah. Yeah, they get you.
Going forward, but it's not in a lot of this old. You won't see it. Another change we've seen is the offense level folks are coming into our system. So misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor, felony. The red line, gross misdemeanor, stayed relatively the same, but there's been a huge flip-flop in the percentage of misdemeanor up here going down, who we supervise, and then the felony have skyrocketed. Okay, and An implication this has is felons are on our caseload a much longer period of time than misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor. Okay. So now some of the key legislative changes, and by no, we are not legislation like experts, so take this with a grain of salt. But so this is kind of the three main things that we see that have changed over this time period that have likely influenced our numbers. Okay, and we're calling these mainly enhancements and widening the net. So this first one is was in 2005, domestic assault by strangulation. The legislature made it a felony to assault a family member, a household member by strangulation, where in the past it was, I believe, a gross misdemeanor. The second bullet, felony domestic assault. In 2006, the legislature removed the requirement that prior offenses had to be against the same victim. So in the past, you had to, it had to be against the same victim to be enhanced to a felony. Now, if there were multiple victims, it can be enhanced to a felony. They also expanded the lookup back period to 10 years and expanded the list of qualified priors. And then the third thing is violation of restraining orders. And this gets a little bit complex. I want to say a couple things here first. When you think of restraining orders, there are kind of two, the best I understand it, there are two different types. One, which is not the one we're talking about here, is called order for protection. An order for protection is in the civil court, and that has to be initiated by the victim. Okay, so the victim goes to the court and says, I want an order for protection. The DANCO, which is the Domestic Abuse No Contact Order, is criminal court, and it's something the judge imposes. The victim may not want it. Doesn't matter. The judge imposes it. Okay? And prior to 2008, if you had a violation of this DANCO, Domestic Abuse No Contact Order, it was punishable as a gross misdemeanor. Now it's punishable as a felony. Part of the reason, well, I bring that up. Ooh. Oh, there we go. Is that you can also see over the last 6, 7 years, whatever, that the percent of clients that were supervising on DANCO offenses has really, really increased. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I kind of wanted to set the stage for you with some of our trends. Yeah, that's the other thing. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Do you want to talk about this? Or?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the best expert to it, but I was going to say, I was going to kind of go back to our legislative changes and sort of beyond what state statute is in the city of St. Paul, we have a blueprint for public safety, right? And it gets into responding in a coordinated manner towards domestic violence from the point of arrest to the point of supervision on probation and a lot of different points in between. And certainly within Ramsey County and the city of St. Paul in particular, that's obviously part of the story of what we're seeing with an increasing number of clients on supervision for domestic abuse. Again, we don't have information to say, what percent of it is due to statutory increases versus the blueprint, but in combination, those things are no doubt working to bring up the number of clients on domestic abuse probation. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, or any thoughts on?
No, just that there's a more intensive follow-up. For example, I know they were finding that once they had done an arrest and then there was a protection order filed, the police are at the home of the victim the next day when the person is released, because quite often they go back to home and the police are then re-arresting.
Yep. All right, now I think.
Okay. So since we re-arrest is a fairly nice transition into recidivism data. Although we're gonna before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about recidivism in general and how we define and measure in Ramsey County. I mean, this recidivism broadly, right, is defined as a relapse or a return to some sort of criminal behavior. In Ramsey County, we define recidivism the following way. It's a client that commits a new offense, misdemeanor level or higher, and that they're ultimately sentenced on that offense in criminal court. Again, I point that out because I think it's important to be very clear on how we're defining and measuring recidivism, because if you are familiar with just various correctional literature, you see recidivism defined and measured a number of different ways, from arrest to like return to prison to all those things. So we're talking about new convictions today, and that's what the data we're going to be showing you.
Is it any conviction or domestic assault?
We're going to start with any conviction, and then we're going to work. We're going to weave and bob here with some of our information. Data we're going to be showing you today is based on a new offense 12 months after the start of probation. Again, I think that's also an important definition to consider. I liken this to our state of Minnesota. Their report they put out every year, the Department of Corrections puts out recidivism data for new felons who commit a new felony up to 3 years after being discharged from supervision. This is a very different definition, okay? This is at the start of supervision, all offenders, all reoffense levels.
And I want to point out, one of the reasons we do it this way is because we're really interested in what our intervention is with clients, not just after they leave us. So, and we find this very helpful to inform our everyday practice and what we might want to change or improve.
So nearly 2,000 offenders that started supervision on a domestic abuse offense over a 3-year period, and we see 30% of them have recidivated, committed any new offense 12 months after the start of supervision. And now, again, to put that number into a little bit of context before we move on, we see some variation in our recidivism rates in the county, depending kind of on the population we're talking about. We can see subgroups of offenders that are recidivating at very low rates, as low as 6-7% for certain populations. This group of domestic, contextually reoffends at a very high rate as far as Ramsey County probationers are concerned. They're on the higher side of recidivism. So there's no questions here. We are going to move on and talk a little bit about what these clients are reoffending with. Okay. So we have, again, our cohort of 2,000 offenders looking at recidivism, and this is by reoffense type. Okay, there's going to be 4 sort of categories that we've put reoffenses in. Okay, going left to right, there's person violent, which is going to include new domestic assaults, assault first, 5th degree, things like criminal sexual conduct, terroristic threats, those type of offenses. So this includes new intimate partner, person-on-person violence, and we're also going to be including some other offenses in there. Why we're doing that is because our recidivism data is based on what you are sentenced at, on the offense you're sentenced on. It may not be what you're charged with. And statutorily, for example, like a 2nd-degree murder, which we see some headlines of some lethality with domestic abuse. I necessarily, through our data, we can't necessarily disentangle the two things. So we're kind of creating this broad person violent category to talk about this group. Okay. Orders for protection, Leah mentioned it. It's a violation of an order that the victim seeks out in civil court. The DANCO, domestic abuse no contact order violation, so the recidivism by that reoffense type. And then a broad category called general, which is a catch-all of everything else from drugs to DWI to theft. You name it, the other offenses are in there. And again, what this shows is that we see higher rates of recidivism, at least with offense type for general recidivism, as well as violations of domestic abuse no contact orders. Okay.
Where's the rest of the percentage? Are those people who don't reoffend?
Correct. Okay. So this would be the percent that do reoffend with that type of offense. So we could say that yes, 94%, 12 months after starting probation do not commit a new person or violent offense. Okay, that's how
I think usually it's categories, so for some of them,
great question. They are not. They are by offense type. So if I commit a new person violent and I commit a new person dangle, I'm reflected in both of those categories. So again, the other way to talk about this, and we always talk about, we present you kind of the overall rate, but then if you talk about, okay, of those that did reoffend, what are they reoffending with? Basically, 50% of those that reoffended committed a general offense. 40+% of those that reoffended committed a new domestic abuse no contact order offense. Questions, other observations? Else we're gonna move on. So we're going to take another step back. We talked to you about kind of overall what's happening. We talked about what this population is reoffending with, at least 12 months after they start probation. We want to talk a little bit about who's reoffending. Okay. You're going to see two charts. The chart on the left, we break out this population by their originating offense level severity. In other words, when you started probation, did you start on a felony domestic? Did you start on a gross misdemeanor domestic? Did you start on a misdemeanor domestic offense? Okay. The rates are the corresponding rate of clients that committed any new offense. And you can see that the gross misdemeanor population, 40% of them reoffended 12 months after start. 35% of the felons and a lesser, although still 25% of the gross or of the misdemeanor population reoffended. To the right, we have risk level. If you hear us corrections folks yammer from time to time, we know we like to talk about the importance of risk. And what that means is we, clients that start probation with us, we want to assess their, using an actuarial risk assessment tool, their likelihood of committing a new offense. And so doing that gets you kind of these categories or groups, right? And again, why this is significant more practically is that your risk level will inform how we supervise you. So the risk principle in corrections clearly states you want to prioritize your supervision and your interventions and your resources and direct them towards higher risk offenders because they're at higher risk of reoffending, right? Pretty straightforward. Again, if we had unlimited resources, we could be a little more innovative and target maybe a lot more people, but the idea is you don't have, obviously, resources are finite, so where are you going to invest them to try to get your best bang for your public safety dollar? So that's kind of the background of what risk means, and that informs how we supervise you, okay?
What are the data years that underlying years?
This is 2009 through 2011 probation.
And then just what was your assessment?
We use, for domestic, we use two risk assessment tools. We use the level of service case management inventory, the LSCMI,
Yep.
and then we also do use the ODERA, which is a specialized tool to look for domestic violence specific reoffending, subsequent intimate partner violence. The LSCMI is predictive of any general kind of reoffending. So,
Are those standardized across the state and all counties?
well, the LSCMI is used.
The ODERA, not necessarily. We picked that as an additional tool.
I know you might hear like the SARA is another assessment. There are a few kind of domestic specific assessments, but you said the ODERA is what we use in Ramsey. And I'm going to say, I don't know what they use in Hennepin. Do you have any idea?
Oh, besides that,
Yeah.
LSCMI, no, I don't.
Do you guys know in Dakota what you? SARA.
Looks like it's pretty predictable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, kind of as a side, but we've used this a lot with the judges because we are really about evidence-based practices. And Ed said we allocate resources depending on the risk level. It's really important because actually with low-risk people, if you intervene too much, it can make them worse. And so it's a way we kind of allocate resources and also talking with the judges about it's not really just your felons you're worried about here. And I think that's been kind of the traditional way cases have been assigned and supervised. So this is really important to us. And our data, and we didn't fudge this, it looks like this for all of our populations. We do a lot of QA too around our assessments, and are we have a lot of probation officers. Are they all assessing, correctly? So we work really hard on trying to ensure the quality of our assessment tools as well. And they also inform not just risk, but case planning. So you can really see other kind of issues you have to target, what we call in the corrections language, criminogenic needs that drive criminal behavior. And you can case plan around what you find out on the assessment tool.
The two other quick points. Again, I want to note that the very high is obviously a very small number of clients. It's only 41. So again, it's there is a subset of clients that reoffend at an extremely high rate 12 months after supervision. I mean, that very high group is off the charts, really. Second, so this is, again, any new offense. So you might be like, well, how does risk play out with some of those by a reoffense type that I showed you on the last slide, right? And we actually see this principle hold true. Low risk offenders reoffend at lower rates in all of these categories compared to high risk offenders. So if you were saying, what does a high risk offender look like with person or violence? The person violence is, that rate is being driven by higher risk offenders. Okay, one other point, I lied. I have one other point. The high and very high also reoffend, so we see they reoffend much higher. They also reoffend, not on this chart, but data shows they reoffend a lot faster. So the bulk of the recidivism that's happening is happening right at the front end of when these clients, within the first 6 months of starting probation. And so that obviously has some very significant implications for how you supervise and intervene with a population that's going to takes off right away from the moment they're put on probation. Again, very, very high rates in that first 3 to 6 months. So we've kind of given you an overview about what our population looks like and how it's changed and sort of how they're behaving once they start probation, for lack of a better term. So
you may be asking, so what?
Right.
And I want to say we're only scratching the surface here. We're just, we still have a lot to do, but here's kind of what we're doing so far with the information we've learned. So kind of what are our current initiatives or next steps? Well, one thing we're working on right now, and we're kind of in the middle of it, is redesigning the domestic abuse caseloads and supervision strategies. So we actually have a unit that specifically focuses on domestic abuse offenders. And that, because the cases have exploded, we've had to add a new supervisor, and we're thinking about adding a new agent. But we're trying to figure out how to best to figure out who should be supervising whom and at what level. So we're still trying to disentangle some of the data we've both shown to figure out what, how we can most effectively do that with caseload size. Again, right now we have some low risk caseloads, and those are very high, over a couple hundred, right? Mm-hmm. And then, and I'm kind of going to the modifying supervision strategies because these are really intertwined. And Ed showed you that very high group. That's kind of a scary percentage, frankly, that 60 whatever percent. Do we really need to think about that caseload separately? Should we really move to more of a surveillance, high intensity model, particularly right out the bat? So those are some of the things we are trying to work through right now, and hopefully we'll put into place, and then we will be able to track with our recidivism information if we're making any improvements.
We talked about, you saw the different kind of risk levels, and you want to supervise differently based upon those risk levels. Kind of sort of best practice suggests for high-risk clients, a probation officer, I wouldn't want to have a caseload of much more than 50. That's kind of the sweet spot. Our domestic abuse high-risk caseloads are in the 80-ish range. So compared to our other high-risk sort of traditional field probation, we're at that kind of 50 range. So, but it isn't surprising with, you can see the increase in clients, and you can see the number of clients that are going to be on for 5 years on felony. That's becoming a real kind of tension right now.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to say about modifying our supervision strategies. as you saw with the recidivism data, we have more than half the folks recidivizing are committing a new crime that's not domestic related. We don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing if we look back 15, 20 years at our domestic abuse offenders, again, I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard this anecdotally, and we kind of see this with our risk tools, that when they were offending, it was more domestic related. And I think our domestic abusers have become more criminal, is one way to put it, at least a subset. We're seeing that in their, in both when we use the risk tool, because the risk tool will identify high needs areas, we're seeing higher risk in some of the criminogenic needs. And again, we see that pretty high general recidivism rate. So typically, again, I mentioned before that part of statute is that domestic abuse offenders have to attend domestic abuse programming, and we still need to do that. But should we also be spending more time, should our probation officer be spending more time really focusing on some of the other issues like substance abuse, unemployment, housing stability, mental health issues? And it's not to say that they don't spend any time, I don't want to give you that impression, but maybe not the right percentage of time. And they're experts in domestic abuse programming, but maybe they need to pair with experts in some of these other areas. Because it seems like that might be an area that we need to really improve on. Okay, so then we are also re-examining the domestic abuse programming that all of our clients use. So most of our programming is done in the community. Offenders have to pay for this programming, and it ranges. There's some that are pretty inexpensive to pretty expensive. We have over 20, at least 25 community vendors. There might be more, but one thing we did set out is we went and visited all the sites in the metro area to learn more about what they were providing, who they were targeting, their cost, any special services they were providing. And we actually put together a whole compendium for probation officers who tend to use one or two because they know them, but to really try to match, because the big thing in corrections is this responsivity issue. We need to match the client's needs to the programs they're getting. And that's not just to risk. It might be to culture, to language, to learning ability. We have some community providers who provide veteran domestic abuse for veterans. We do have women domestic abusers, about 7%, which is a decent number when you consider the total number. You have to have separate programming for women. So we've been really working with our community providers to learn more about what they're doing and to get probation officers to better match. It can be up to the offender to decide where they want to go, but if a probation officer is more informed and can say, here, 3 or 4 options, or maybe geographically, they match your culture, they match your learning style, whatever, that might be more effective because we do see a pretty high rate of offenders not completing programming.
Can you evaluate the outcomes by program?
Well, we used to contract with them, now we don't. So we have, we used to get information from the vendors. So now we have to figure out how to track that on our end, which means our POs have to enter that information. So we're working on that, and that's something we told the judges we would do. Now, it gets a little hard. As an evaluator, I get a little nervous about this because you're not comparing apples to apples. One provider might be working with a way tougher population than the other, and it's really hard to articulate that. Particularly, again, our judges want this information. So we have this data set. We're going to be analyzing it. I'm struggling with how we want to present this. And also, these folks can be in other programs, too. They could be in anger management. They could be doing substance abuse. They could be in other things. To attribute something like not recidivating to this program is incredibly tricky.
You have programs also, again, that are urged maybe to compare across, as you do have programs that might only serve 4 or 5 clients over a 2-year period. Again, it might be a very specialized program for specialized clients. It's hard to, some of these programs are very small in terms of the number that they
But we are tracking, and part of it is to even see how many folks finish programming, because that's a huge piece. Right. And what is that about? It may not be the program. It may be that the provider's in Timbuktu and the person can't get there. I don't know. But we're trying to follow some of that stuff and see what we can learn.
You thought of paying your contractors for outcomes?
Well, we don't contract for this. We used to. We no longer have money to do it. So we can't. Our money was taken away. The offenders pay.
But the providers are certified by you?
No. There's no certification. Again, that's one of the reasons why we went out and did site visits. Yeah.
I mean, there's some state statute requirements for what the provider needs to, like credentials and along those lines. So there are some requirements for providers, but
Pretty loose. I mean, there's a lot of room for variation, as there should be. So I'm going to lead into it because another thing we're doing is we're piloting 2 programs because a lot of the community program, if you look at literature on what's effective domestic abuse programming-wise, not a lot has been shown to be effective, okay? So we are working with kind of two different universities, really, or experts from universities on 2 different pilots that the old models are a little bit more Duluth model based. I don't know how many of you heard of that, but and these new models are a little bit more focused on some COG and relationship building and even a little substance abuse has shown to be promising. So we are internally leading these groups and we're just starting to see if it might be another option. Do you have a question?
Yeah, in Melissa transition from the and just wondering, we're all about talking about trauma.
Yeah.
Part of what you guys are getting currently, there's the Children's Justice Initiative, where we're trying to with the courts and social workers and folks to bring on we talked about the role of trauma and how that affects how well people are received and support people. And I'm wondering if that's any part of what you guys can do with trauma.
Well, trauma's come in big in our juvenile system. That's the big thing right now. I would say in one of our pilots, trauma's touched on, but just a tiny bit, so it's recognized. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of feeds into the rest of the program. The other pilot that I was actually trained in, so I know more about, is kind of interesting because it's not really so much about domestics, it's about core values and the actions that take you and move you towards those core values and those that take you away. And it's not judgmental based. And I just sat in on the first graduation. It was 7 guys made it through, and it was one of the most powerful things I've ever heard as far as feedback. It was a very diverse group of guys who've been through our system a number of times, back through programming, and they're like, this is the first time I've been in a program that I felt like I was valued. It wasn't all shaming and blaming, and we created the team. I trust the guys here. It was pretty cool, and they really said they're learning how to communicate and listen, and how to think that their thoughts don't necessarily control their actions. So they take a time out and then they act. So it was pretty powerful. Again, it was 7 guys, and it's something new we're trying. But we're trying. So that's, and then I want to go over one last slide, and then we can open it up for more questions. Because this really has to do about the DANCOs. It's complex, again. Again, we've seen such an increase in the DANCOs. And one of the pieces that's been brought up is there have been a number, and I don't know, we've heard this anecdotally, but from a number of people, of consensual violations, okay? So this is where the partners want to be together, whether good or bad, okay? And maybe like they're pulled over for a traffic violation, and then the cop sees that the guy has a DANCO, and then he's sent back to a correctional facility. And so we've been kind of trying to understand this better. We've talked to over 14 victim advocacy organizations in the area about this consensual violation of the DANCO. And some of the things we're learning from there is oftentimes financially they want to be together, they can't, it's just not going to work. Or they have children. Another thing is cultural norms might dictate the woman needs to be with the man, particularly new immigrant family cultures and some of the others. We've heard that. So we have that piece. We think we need to do a better job of educating offenders right away, even pre-trial maybe, of what a DANCO means, because with the day and age of social media, a group text counts. That is a violation. Anything on Facebook counts. That is violation. You will end up back in our correctional facility. And so we need to do a way better job of educating, I think, both the offender and the victim. And then we've also had discussions with the bench showing them the numbers because, again, the DANCO is something the judge orders. And there are times when victims have said they want that DANCO taken away. And again, this gets to be a touchy subject because you don't know if that person's being coerced or not, so I understand that. But the judges are very hesitant to take that DANCO away. So we're in discussions to try to figure this out. We have some judges who tend to just put the DANCO on the case no matter what, and others who don't. So to better kind of understand that process and the implications, I think it is disproportionately affecting our African American young men. And so that concerns us deeply. Again, it's hard to disentangle all this exactly why that is, but it seems to be the case. So those are some of the things we're doing. We don't have results yet on what's working, but hopefully we can come back at some point and we'll have new information. So any more questions, comments?
Just when you're talking about your pilot programs, are you talking those, are those in the community or are those with people who are in custody?
Both. We are doing one right now at our correctional facility, which is kind of interesting. And the original idea behind it was to do 4 weeks in the facility, 4 weeks out, which I think is a pretty good idea for all sorts of reasons, mainly with our staffing and unions. I think right now it's in the facility, but the hope is to do kind of that transition time. The other one is a longer program, and it's out in probation. And right now, probation staff, our internal, and one vendor is trained to do it. And it's something that comes out of Iowa, and we hope to train more people if we find that it's working. Do you have a question?
You touched on this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about why you chose tracking offenders when they start probation, not after they start probation? Can you talk a little bit like phone conference?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Leah sort of touched on it. To us, the reason we have really focused on tracking after a client or after clients start probation is because that gives us some, a 12-month recidivism rate for clients that start on probation, unless they're still on probation. I mean, clients are going to be getting a minimum of a year on probation, often 5, often even times more. So it gives us at least a basis to kind of look at what we're doing, how our clients are doing, and maybe to sort of explore particular subgroups that might be recidivating at very high rates, might be recidivating very quickly, and trying to sort of strategize and improve practice around that. So it gives us some more information that we find is a little more tangible to use than after discharge. Now, we take a look at recidivism after discharge. Perhaps not surprising, recidivism is lower when we measure it after discharge than when we look at it after start. But again, it's a little hard to, oftentimes if we're looking a year, 2, 3 years out from discharge, to really speak intelligently about the intervention being provided and the supervision being provided. It kind of loses a little bit of its power. And because clients, again, we talk about risk, well, we know risk is not a static concept, right? Risk is a dynamic concept. I mean, our goal in corrections is to try to help clients reduce their risk of committing a new offense, right? That's the public safety piece of it. So for us, it's very important on that front end to really look at
well, and also, we don't just do 12-month recidivism, so we can look at 24, 36, and some of that people might be getting off probation. We're interested in looking at the trajectory for desistance. When do people desist, basically, from criminal activity? And so, because we had to create an automated recidivism tracking system in our county, because when I first came in this position 6 years ago, we were doing this all manually. We're hand looking it up, and so we couldn't do any of this kind of stuff. So we built this system. But we're just, we're not in the infancy stage. We're pretty well established, but we are still need time to elapse to have data over time, if that makes sense to you. So we will be looking at 24, 36, 48 months to get a better idea of kind of folks' trajectory over time.
Listen, our start is sort of like how are we doing when we look at from discharge is kind of how we tell it. It's sort slightly different set of questions, and then
I think we also really try to use this, again, internally, operationally, to talk about practice. How you want to talk about, we were just in a discussion the other day with our director about talking about recidivism. As you can see, you can slice it and dice it a million ways, and it means a million different things to different people. How you talk about that to the board. And so we were just in this discussion because our director's like, wait a minute, you know, I talked about it this way, and I'm going to confuse them this way, and it can get really tricky to make sure everyone understands the definition you're talking about. So how do you want to talk about it to, you know, decision high up, kind of board, politicians, decision makers, versus how we talk about it internally is quite different.
With your program pilots, are you thinking about tracking recidivism in a post-program, or are you still really picking them up when they start the program?
We can do either, because we probably want to look at both.
The issue for that will be getting enough folks where we can get a
That's
sample
the
that,
problem.
you know, when you only have
Devin
10 or
isn't
12
going
people
to
right?
tell you too much, yeah.
And what outcomes beyond recidivism, like, are you tracking for the pilot?
Well, most of it, you know, one of the pilots has a pre-post test that has to do with aggression and kind of emotional abuse, and it's a self-administered survey, I guess you want to call it, that came out of Iowa. The other one we're still working on. It's short term, and it's kind of, you know, obviously we can say did people complete, right? It can be hard to measure a skill change or a thought change in such a short time. So we're still trying to figure out how to do some of that.
Another option for which to kind of track behavior is probation violations and subsequent probation violations, which is a little different than recidivism. It's going to be more like related to your conditions of probation. But again, I think it does, in a way, speak to some behavior change that you want to see. Again, clients, you know, not abusing substances, completing programming, showing up to appointments. I mean, just the litany of different sort of behaviors that you're looking to you know, hopefully see as a result of programming and continued intervention. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk about how this
Well, I think right now it's being used for the redesign process, because there's been a lot of push and pull between what management wants and what the probation officers want. But I think it helps when we can bring back numbers and recidivism to really, you know, we can verify, yes, your caseloads are increasing, your workload is increasing, you are having higher risk folks. We do need to put more resources into your area. So I think in that way, it's been positive.
I was just going to say, beyond the domestic abuse population, of just being able to provide information of this type, recidivism, trend stuff to probation officers has been appreciated in our department, because it gives them some actual, I mean, they're getting some actual data back about how things are going, what the work is they're doing. I think sometimes that loop doesn't always get maybe trickle down, shall we say, to the line staff. So part of, I mean, our job in research and evaluation is to kind of be that link a little bit.
Well, and I think also we've been hearing for a while the PO saying we need more resources, but we weren't really hearing what, you know, it's kind of anecdotal. So here we can kind of, particularly with our assessment tools and some of the learning about the other criminal behavior, we might be able to say, okay, we do need more mental health resources, or we do need more employment or education resources. So I think that has helped being able to kind of quantify and take real steps towards putting other pieces in place. So.
My understanding is that domestic abuse really ignores socioeconomic class or anything that is pretty widespread throughout the society. But if you're talking, those services you're talking about, in my mind, are more focused on lower income people. But am I, or I guess I didn't see any socioeconomic data.
Yes, and unfortunately we don't have that. That would be interesting. I would say, like, again, back in the 80s, earlier, I would say your comment was true. I think, particularly as you can see in our change in demographics, and we know a lot of that change in the black population is young black males, 18 to 24. and we know the economic recession that's happened, that I don't think that's as true as it was. I would say that's true with our DWI population, but I don't, as far as representing kind of all different folks in the class system, I'm not sure that's the case here. I think we do offer service. I mean, the programming isn't, I wouldn't say, targeted towards any kind of socioeconomic class. And I think services, mental health, substance abuse, those things. But like you're saying, the education, employment, definitely.
I mean, some programs do offer, I mean, significant reductions in like the fee to attend the program based upon like socioeconomic status. So I mean, some of that comes into the treatment actually noticing or knowing that information about your client, that you might be able to refer them and target them to a program like that, that it might not be such a financial burden and hopefully get them into to actually complete the program. But I would kind of concur there. I just wanted to note that we do, I mean, that's kind of a consideration when referring to program, is trying to identify those providers.
I'm just wondering if you've explored the role of nativity or membership in or affiliation with one of our immigrant and refugee communities.
As far as, I'm not sure if they were one of the advocacy groups contacted. They might be.
I'm just wondering about the claims.
Well, and then they may be, again, we have a list of all the, if they provide any kind of domestic abuse programming, hopefully we know about them in our compendium. If we don't, we need to know about them.
But you're
talking about other services?
I'm talking about the offenders.
And how many are from
I'm just wondering if you've had experience exploring it, whether it's a substantial role or a substantial figure.
I would say we don't.
We don't know. Yeah, sure.
Let's go here.
Yeah, sure.
My question is kind of actually similar to this. It sounds like you have some additional data, like race, but maybe not some socioeconomic factors, other factors.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of answers the second question I was going to ask, which is, have you thought about doing any statistical analysis to try to better understand what's really driving it? One of the things that I know we struggle with the criminal justice system in the courts is that a lot of times you have certain things that are actually masking other correlations and other indicators. So, I mean, especially when it comes to risk, that may be something that, is actually doubling up on Social Security or other things. So,
and we've worked a little bit with an outside consultant to help us do some more statistic analysis around particularly our risk tool and the domains within the risk tool and recidivism. And so I think we hope to continue to do some of that work. That sort of gets at your question.
Yeah, I mean, what we've had kind of questions about when we find some information in the courts with judges. I experienced with judges. So when you find information in the courts, that it is very important to be able to say if this actually has a correlation that is meaningful, or if it's just a correlation, like if it's actually causal or not.
Right.
And so that's just kind of what I would. Yeah.
And I think we'd like to move that way. I think it's super complex as far as all the factors involved in these individuals' lives. So yeah, that's it's some of it, but not all of it.
Well, I was coming to the same line. I mean, there seems to be a lot of confounding factors in this training, like the economic, recession and all the socioeconomic that are not there. So yeah, it seems that you will benefit from acquiring more data and more.
Yeah, and it just from